On this edition of In the Gun, the exciting conclusion of the greatest team in Mountaineer program history. We've got some kneeling teams against some rich rod teams. Who's going to come out on top? We'll find that out in this edition of ITG.
Let's go!
You are now watching Believe. Do you believe?
Go single! Joe, nuts! Nuts!
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
Oh!
There's nobody that hates Pitt in this world as much as I do. Pat Narduzzi, who's such a blowhard. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
250-pound lumbering Owen Schmidt, almost a folk hero here for West Virginia.
Had some moonshine, had the good vibes going.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
They come out in cover one. He kind of knew where he was going with the football because of the alignment of the safety.
Closely defended there, but a really nice throw by Garrett Green.
I love it!
You're in the right place. You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 171 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. Wesley Euler here with the best teammates in the business. We got the signal caller, Jed Drenning, our buddy, the runaway beer truck, Owen Schmidt, going to be joining us in just a few minutes towards the end of this episode as we will crown our greatest Mountaineer team of all time. Oh, yeah. But as always, before we get into any and all of that, you already know this episode of ITG, brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online, your number one source for all your sports betting needs. Baseball, golf, soccer, all the top fights in UFC and MMA and boxing. It's all at Bet Online. Every stat, every matchup, live odds and spreads while the games are being played. And when the game's over, you can use their online casino to get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with over 150 slot games. So head to their website today to get in on the action or download the mobile app and use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit at Bet Online. The game starts here. Jed, our tournament of champions, our greatest Mountaineer team in program history, started on episode 170 of ITG. We are down to the final four, and it's very fitting how this worked out. We have the Nealon bracket, our number one overall seed, the 1988 Mountaineers, against the number 4 overall seed, the 1993 Mountaineers. And then in the other side of the final four here, the Rich Rod bracket, the 2 seed and the 3 seed, all chalk making it to the final here, by the way. That's an advertiser's dream. You got all the big brands making it, all right? No George Mason or Loyola here in the final four. The 2 seed, the 2005 Sugar Bowl champions, and the 3 seed, the 07 Fiesta Bowl champs, Bill Stewart and the boys for that one. So, Jed, into the final four here. You want to start with the Nealon region first? What are we looking at?
Well, the first question I have to pose, Wes, is I do wonder, when I seeded these things, I really couldn't tell if I was right, wrong, if I was way off base, if I was pretty close to what the fans might agree with. Now, on the one hand, you wouldn't think it's that difficult to come up with the top 4 seeds, right? I mean, to me, that seemed like where the conversation started. These 4 teams, all conversations should kind of sort of start around them, right? And the reason I say that is the best couple Coach Rod teams, the best couple Coach Nealon teams, and then build from there. So I do have to ask, was it that easy to pick out 1 through 4 because those are the seeds still left standing? Or was there a touch of the seeds maybe influencing the voters? Because it did cross my mind when I put this together. Should I maybe leave the seeds out because I don't want that to be part of it? Sure. You see 7, and I don't want you influenced to pick 7 over 10. Even that's strange that I say that because 10 upset 7, but
right. No, I get what you're saying.
I don't know that was the case. I think this is truly the 4 teams that people feel or regard in Mountaineer Nation as the 4 best in history, I would think. Am I wrong?
I think the only team that people might throw in there is that Orange Bowl, Geno Smith, Clemson team. But it's hard to argue against these 4. The regular season success, the body of work, it's hard to argue against you got a couple teams that finish. Actually, all 4 of these teams finished in the top 10 of the final AP poll, correct? '88
Well,
was fifth
I got it all
overall.
listed right there.
Yeah, '88 was fifth overall. '93 was seventh overall. '05 fifth overall. '07 sixth overall. So all teams that finished in
Yeah.
the top seven of the
Yeah.
rankings. I think so. I mean, these to me, with all respect to that 2011 team and how electric they were, particularly on offense. And I know that team had a lot of guys that played in the NFL too, and the Keith Tandys and the Bruce Irvins that helps that argument. But I think these are the four, pretty
I think so
consensus team.
too. We started the last episode off talking to how off air we were having Mount Rushmore conversations, right? And usually the Mount Rushmore conversations are difficult because the time you get to three or certainly four, that's where it intensifies and it becomes much more difficult
Sure.
to select who's going to be left standing. I don't know if that's the case here because again, you can come up with some really salty football teams as your fifth seed or your number five, whether it's an Art Pappy Lewis team, whether it's the '06 team that won the Gator Bowl and
Yep.
finished 10th.
Yep.
Again, that Art Pappy Lewis team in 1953 finished 10th in the final poll. But I don't think there's a very compelling argument to be made that you could dislodge one of these four from where they right
I
now
agree.
are in this tournament. So this is where it belongs. This is how it should be.
I think you're absolutely right, and pretty fitting that two of the most celebrated teams in school history, '88 and '93, not too far apart, both under Don Nehlen, here against each other in our first Final Four matchup. Jed.
Yeah, so let's start the conversation once again with the '88 team. What the '88 team did was that they showed up and they ended up one way or another by hook or by crook scoring. Sometimes it was after a slow start, but eventually this team things would come together, and at some point in the football game, sometimes it was midway through the second quarter, sometimes it didn't happen the second half. But they would go on a run, and all of a sudden, what appeared to be a one-score game turns into a 30 or 40 point blowout because of the explosive nature of this football team. Now, you
Yep.
pit that against the scrappy nature, the overachieving nature of this '93 team. I told you in the last episode, Wes, when we looked at the final stats from an offensive scoring standpoint, from a defensive scoring standpoint, this '93 team, this is the one that might have surprised me the most because I don't regard them as a dynamic team or a dominant defensive football team. I just see them as opportunistic scrappers that find ways to dig deep and win football games. But they were top 10 defensively, finished 10th in the country in points allowed, almost top 10 offensively, finished 11th in the country in points allowed. And then, of course, when you talk about the big moments and the big wins, we talk about moments on this show all the time and how
Yeah.
meaningful
Yeah.
those are to the fans. Well, look at the moments that they had. Before you get into the Miami game, you had the Louisville game in Morgantown. That was an epic game. And Louisville had half a dozen chances to win that football game, but West Virginia finds a way. This '93 team just found ways. And then the '93 team against Miami when all the chips were down with 70,000 plus in attendance. We all remember where we were. I've told the story myself. I was getting on the plane when I heard the score after following a playoff game in Montana when I was playing for Rich, and we heard the score and we all just went nuts that West Virginia had knocked off the fourth-ranked Hurricanes. And then, of course, you go to the BC game. And that's when you just felt, boy, the stars are truly aligned for this football team. With the way
Yep.
that thing came down and everything we forced things to fall our way in the final seconds. And so it's just, there's so much to say about this incredible football team. And there's so much to say about the '88 team. But at the end of the day, I think what fans looked at was the '88 team, took no prisoners. I mean, they showed up irrespective of who they were playing. Say what you want about their schedule. They took care of business week in, week out. And
Yeah.
a lot of people still argue, but for the injury to Major Harris, who kind of sort of knows what may or may not have played out in the desert against Notre Dame.
Yep.
It certainly would have ended up the way it did. It would have been a fundamentally different football game. That's what I can promise you. I can't promise you we would have won. I can't promise you the outcome would have been different. I can just promise you it would have been a much different football game with a Major Harris at full strength, which we'll never see. So one of the things I wanted to do, Wes, was a lot of people ask about pro talent on these teams. So when you look at the teams, the 88 team and the 93 team, who was drafted from these football teams? Well, obviously with the 88 team, start with the 89 draft. When you look at the selections in the 89 draft, there were 8 selections. Bo Orlando, Craig Taylor, Andre Johnson, Chris Parker, A.B. Brown, Al Boyd Mays, Pat Marlette, Brian Smiter. Now, we had more rounds in the NFL draft back then, but that notwithstanding, that's just the 89 draft. Now jump to the 90 draft. And these guys were on that team as well. Renaro Turnbull, Reggie Rimbert, Mike Fox, Basil Proctor, Jack Lynn, Lonnie Brockman, and of course, Major Harris. Those are all from that 88 team.
Yeah.
That was a stacked and loaded football team on both sides of the ball. It's not an accident that they were as dominant as they were, irrespective of who they were playing. So at the end of the day, I think, and we'll talk about the pro talent before we get into the final result for the 93 team as well, which they had their share of it. When you go to the 94 draft off that 93 team, Rich Braham, you talk about West Virginia through and through. Jay Kearney, Darren Studstill, and then you go to the 95 draft, Todd Sauerburn, even into 96, Aaron Beasley, John Brown, and Cantroy Barber, Lovett Purnell. And then you get into your Mike Logans and some of those younger, Canute Curtis.
Dog, Mike Logan.
That's in the 97 draft. That's in the 97 draft. But I think he was part of that 93 team. He was on that roster, right?
I believe so.
I think he was. I think he had
so.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's how things stacked up from a personnel standpoint. And you would think at this juncture, the voting, which we saw so lopsided in those opening rounds, oftentimes in the 90-some percentile, the way the fans voted, this not quite that, but still maybe a little more one-sided than you might expect. It just shows the incredible love and passion that Mountaineer Nation will always foster for that 1988 Major-led Mountaineer football team. Don Nehlen's undefeated regular season. They win the day against the 93 team, bringing in 75% of the vote. So they advance to the championship round of our 16-team tournament to determine the best team in West Virginia football history. Hats off to the 1988 Mountaineers for advancing. Now, thoughts?
Well, real quick, I don't know why I hesitated because, of course, Mike Logan made the famous interception against Boston College in the end zone his freshman year in '93 to preserve.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Listen,
yep.
Mike Logan's the homie. I see him every year at training camp. All right, so I got to come correct. All right, I can't. On the off chance that he listens to this, he's gonna beat me up here in about a month when I see him for not remembering. As a freshman, 1993, Mike Logan recovered a fumble against Boston College in that game, made the game-sealing interception in the end zone that preserved the undefeated season and, of course, the Sugar Bowl appearance. So, yes, big shout-out to that 90. Cool. Insane.
It's a freshman doing that. I mean, for all the names that come to mind defensively, when I think of the 93 team, I would struggle to remember Mike Logan as part of what first comes. Mike Logan came to mind later. Right. But when I think of the 93 team, his contributions, think about that. He was making significant contributions, and there were so many other marquee players.
It's impressive.
It's very impressive. Very impressive.
It really is. So, Jed, but as you shared, the 88 team, a comfortable victory over their 93 counterparts. But I tell you what, that's certainly an interesting one. Another thank you to our friends at Toothman, our guy JR. Big shout out to everybody at Toothman Ford. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a break. We're gonna come back on the other side, and we're gonna see the Rich Rod portion of this Final Four, and then who cuts down the nets to continue to use some March Madness analogies here. Who will be crowned the best team ever? And of course, we got to get Big Owen's thoughts on this 05 team versus the 07 team, his first team and his last team at WVU, who he thinks would have beaten one another had they lined up. We'll get into all that when we return on the other side. You are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
ITG will return after these messages.
Head right in the open field. Pad right to the house.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
If you work the land, you just got to be a jack of all trades type. There's just too much to do. So if you got to be a welder or a farmer or a ditch digger, that's just who you are that day. Then tomorrow, you can be somebody else.
Get your Coyote at the new location of Johnston Equipment between Weston and Buchanan.
Back in the gun here as we roll along. Who is the greatest WVU football team of all time? We've got one of the Final Fours solidified here. The 1988 team is into the championship. That leaves the Rich Rod bracket, or the Big O bracket here, maybe. Our 2005 Mountaineers, of course, Sugar Bowl champions over Georgia, and the 2007 Mountaineers, Fiesta Bowl champions over Oklahoma. Big O, before Jed gives the results of how our listeners voted on this, when I talk about your 2005 team, your 2017 team, or your 2007 team, pardon me, anything stand out as a different? I mean, a lot of similar players, right? A BCS victory to end the season, but I don't know. Is there anything that stands out to you as a difference between the 05 and the 07 groups?
The defenses were different. All lines were different.
Defensively, you mean 07 was nastier, Owen?
I'm saying we had two different squads. It wasn't the same squad that was in 05 and 07. So
yeah,
you had different elements. Like our O-line was, I mean, completely.
A lot of turnover on the O-line, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of turnover there. And then I guess as far as outside threats, were the same. Darius, Tito, Wes was in there.
And in a corner, who you taking, 05 or 07?
I feel like the defense is what made those two teams. I feel like the offenses still were, I mean, we were what we were, but I don't know. It was something about the defense those years. You had completely different linebacking cores and completely different secondaries. You just had a lot of unique players, man. I mean, it's real. That's
so head to head. Who do you think wins that game?
Oh boy.
'05 or 07?
This is tough.
Putting them on the spot.
I'm gonna say 07.
Ooh.
07. 07.
Well,
Big
that's
O,
what
the
that's
runaway
what our
beer truck himself, says 07.
that's what our listeners said as well too.
Yes, they did. Overwhelmingly.
Yep.
Overwhelmingly said it. It's Owen, our fans, Mountaineer fans, 85% of them took 07 over 05. Now, quick recap. The 2005 team, obviously, program defining win, as we've talked about, against Georgia. Those don't come along very often, right? It's a generational type victory over over Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And then there was the Louisville game, which a lot of people would regard as one of the greatest games of all time for various reasons. I mean, people are going to put that on their top 10 list when they're rattling off 10 greatest Mountaineer games, not wins, games, right? So both of those were authored by that 2005 team. And then you get into the 07 team, which I'll tell you what, that schedule was no joke.
Yeah, it
You
was.
played 5 ranked teams. You beat 4 of them, which is more wins against ranked competition than any team in program history.
Yep.
The one loss was against a ranked South Florida team among the ranked teams. Okay. So you were 4-1 against top 25 teams. And then when you look at statistically where these two teams finished, 05, you as a group were kind of finding what you were going to be all about, it felt like, right? You weren't quite right. I mean, you were scoring, but not with the ease and consistency that you did later on.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah. We were just figuring ourselves out, man. I mean, it was
yeah, it's a good way of putting
it was freshman year, basically. You know what I mean?
Exactly. That's a perfect way to summarize it. So you finished statistically 31st in the country in scoring, 13th in defensive scoring. Now, when you look to the 07 team, here's what's crazy about it. You guys had the 9th ranked scoring offense in all of college football, scoring 40 points a game, which is the most of any team per game in this tournament. But defensively, you finished higher in defensive scoring. You were ranked 8th nationally. That's just crazy. A top 10 scoring defense, a top 10 scoring offense. Wes, I'm looking through the numbers here. You have the same sheet that I put together and sent to you. That's the only time we've done that. Top 10 in both those categories, scoring offense, scoring defense, right?
That's exactly it. That Reed Williams led defense, baby. I tell you, they weren't messing around.
Yeah.
But yeah,
so
top
Owen,
10,
top
10 nationally, top 10
85%.
nationally in scoring offense and scoring defense. That you don't see that very often.
85% of the fans went with 07. You agree?
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's great players from both years, and it's just looking at it. You know what I mean? Once I kind of like gathered it back in my mind, some of the moments too. You know, you kind of got to rock and roll with that 07 team, and just kind of what we did during the season. Unfortunately, you know, that all leads to the Pitt game where we blew the big one, but we're able to at least finish with a solid victory against Oklahoma, which was, I mean, that was just as much of an defensive as it was offensive showcase. So it was, I mean, both teams probably just as much fun to play on either one. But yeah, like you were saying, Jed, we were kind of just, you know, we were junior high kids that first year.
So what do you think it happens 07 plays 05? It comes down to the wire. It's like a 24-23 game, a McAfee field goal on the buzzer. I mean, that type of thing. Is that what we're looking at?
Noel Devine, the difference at the end.
That's what I'm saying. Are we dusting them? Is our speed just unparalleled in 07?
Oh, because I mean, you had Steve, and Pat all firing on full cylinders, and you threw Noel into the mix. I mean,
dude, he was so scatty on the field. It was like unreal.
It was.
Yeah,
it was unreal.
That's some nice depth. That's some nice depth, right? No doubt about that. So, yeah, I can just imagine the 05 team taking the field Morgantown, the 07 team taking the field Morgantown, and watching. That would be that would just be crazy because you had this combination at quarterback. Pat, halfway through the season, found himself, and that's when really the offense found himself. Steve had the breakout against Louisville as well. You were kind of the steady Eddie, consistent piece in that backfield through most of that season, and everything else just kind of came together as you were feeling each other out. And defensively, I would argue that was the first season that Jeff Castile kind of came into his own and made his name. He had some nasty defenses, some salty units, 03, 04, even 02. But that season's really when it glued together and some things started to happen on that side of the ball as well. So it'd be a heck of a nasty matchup. But the fans agree with you, Owen. They went with 85% 07. And Owen, what that means is your 2007 Mountaineer team. Now, I do think, had you not gone into the desert and absolutely taken care of business with so many exclamation points, history would regard this team so differently. But you rebounded, you bounced back from your darkest hour, you finished with such an incredible, compelling win. That's why you're part of this conversation. So you advance to the championship round against the 1988 Mountaineers. It's down to 2 to determine the greatest team in West Virginia football history. They've been doing it since 1891, folks. And we're down to 2, Wes.
Yes, and before we tell you who won in a tight contest, a thank you to our friends at Fortis for presenting this episode of In the Gun, and our buddy Rick Lewis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. All right, Jed, we've had some blowouts in this tournament, but in the national championship game, it came down to the wire between Don Nehlen's finest, Major Harris and the 88 boys, and Rich Rod's finest, Big O, Pat White, Steve, and the 07 boys. Jed, who cut down the nets, who took home the trophy?
So what I want to do is we have some graphics that really flesh this thing out. Let's talk about it, and then let's give you the result. So let's start by breaking down the schedules. You look at the 2007 schedule, and we're going to get to the 1988 schedule. And what I looked at was kind of the flow of the game. First of all, who you were playing and how the game went. What was the score at halftime? What was the score after the third quarter? I don't want a deceiving final score. So, I hate to use the term game control. I'm not part of the CFP committee, but game flow is what I was looking at. What type of game were we dealing with against what type of competition? And then I have a chart that shows where you were ranked each week throughout the season. Let's start with the 07 team. And then we're going to discuss the 1988 team. But Skylar, if you want to throw up the graphic, and then we'll get into some other parts of the discussion afterwards. The 07 team, Owen, you guys, preseason, you were ranked number 3 in the country. You never fell below number 13 in the country, and that was after the loss to South Florida. And you climbed all the way back up to number 2, then fell to 11, and then you finished at number 6. So consistently across the board throughout the course of the season. And from a game flow standpoint, what I looked at was who was winning and who was trailing. When was West Virginia winning and when was West Virginia trailing at each of these intervals? Halftime in each game, after the third quarter in each game, and then obviously the final score. Throughout the course of the entire season, here are the times that you trailed at halftime. Twice, and that's it. You trailed Marshall 13-6. We all know how that went. Final score 48-23. You trailed South Florida 14-3 before losing 21-13. South Florida was one of only 2 games that you trailed after 3 quarters. 21-6 you trailed in Tampa. And then, of course, the Pitt game, you trailed 10-7. But so altogether, counting the final score and when you trailed at these intervals, I mark it on red in the graphics 6 times at all these different intervals. So that's 3 possible intervals times 12 games, 36 intervals. Only 6 of those 36 intervals did you trail. So from a game flow standpoint, now again, bear in mind, this was against 5 ranked teams as well. So that needs considered as part of all this in the bigger picture. So then you get into the 1988 team with the same discussion. game flow. First of all, from a ranking standpoint, where'd they start, how things look along the way, where'd they finish, preseason. This team, now bear in mind, 1987, we had almost upset Syracuse, a Sugar Bowl Syracuse team to finish the regular season, which got us the bowl bid against the Mike Gundy, Thurman Thomas, Barry Sanders, Oklahoma State team in El Paso. So we had a little bit of buzz coming into the 88 season, but we were only preseason 16. We didn't climb to the top 10 until September 27th. We landed at 7, and then we kind of stayed there throughout the course of the season. And even after the loss to Notre Dame, we only fell to 5th in the final AP ranking. Now, from a game flow standpoint, the 1988 team, again, I looked at halftime score for the third quarter, and final score. They never trailed in the regular season at halftime. They never trailed after 3 quarters. And obviously, they won all 11 games, the final score. So the only 3 times, 3 intervals in each of the 12 games here. You guys had 13 games, though, and I should have said 39 instead of 36. This team had 12 games, so 3 intervals per game, 36 total. Only 3 did they trail. All 3 Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame. They trailed at halftime 23-6. Again, we talked about the Major Harris injury. 26-13 after the third quarter. Felt like they were going to still try and make a run. Didn't quite happen. Final score 34-21. And if you want to look at the graphics on the YouTube side as we're discussing this, we put them up on screen. I even have the average scores at halftime, the average scores at the end of the third quarter. Again, I wanted to give you some sense of game flow so the final score wasn't deceiving. In other words, so nobody could say, well, against this team as opposed to that team, the backups and scrubs gave up all the points. Well, this can kind of tell you the truth behind the flow of the overall game. So thoughts on that before we get to the final part of the discussion, because there's another interesting graphic that we're going to go through and discuss. But what are your guys' thoughts on that in general?
That's just wild that they never trailed until the Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame at halftime or the third quarter. That's just insane. I mean, I know they didn't play the toughest schedule that year, but that's still crazy.
Yeah, I had momentum in every game. I mean, it seemed like it just kind of really what happened in that last game, anyways, was, when they lose the heartbeat, you know what I mean? Still had a fighting
You did
chance,
bounce back.
Yeah.
So now what we're going to do, I do know what you mean. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to make the case for 88 and make the case for 07. And then we're going to give you one, but one for each. So let's I think you know where this is going, but we'll get to that. The case for 88. The case for 88. Final AP ranking, number 5. The case for 07. Final AP ranking, number 6. 88, only unbeaten, untied regular season in school history. 07, only team in school history, listen closely, to be ranked number 1 in a major poll. And yes, folks, you might forget it, but that did happen. It was the USA Today coaches poll following the winner of UConn upstairs in a locker. I actually have the USA Today. I went out and bought it the second that came out. You can find it online. It was the November 26, 2007 coaches poll. West Virginia, number 1 in the country, followed by Missouri, Ohio State, Georgia, Kansas, Virginia Tech on down the line. So, yeah, we had 37 first-place votes. The second most first-place votes was 17 with Missouri. We were number 1 in a major poll. That's the 07 team. Go back to the 88 team, played for a national title. Go back to the 07 team, matched the highest-ranked win in school history. That Oklahoma team, irrespective of where you were, irrespective of venue, was ranked number 4 in the country. That matches the highest ranked team we have ever beaten. Now, 88 team, number 2 scoring offense, number 15 scoring defense, 2 and 15 scoring offense, scoring defense. We talked about it. 07, 9th scoring offense, number 8 scoring defense. So 215 versus 9 and 8. 1988 team won the backyard brawl against what was a ranked Pitt team. Pitt went on to finish 6 and 5, but they were ranked at the time, early in the season. the 07 team, number 6 Heisman vote getter. The 88 team, number 5 Heisman vote getter. This is almost uncanny. This one, guys, I did a lot of research to dig this up, and this might be the single most fascinating fact that these two teams share in common. Both teams handed 7 opponents their worst margin of defeat of the year. That's crazy.
A good one.
That's a good one.
That's
Both teams did that.
Stat.
And that's kind of telling of, okay, how did you do against them compared to how everybody else did against them? So each team, 7 times, they handed the opposition their worst margin of defeat of the year. And then finally, the case for 1988 from a pop culture standpoint, if you remember, they gave us Mountaineer rap. You remember this? You guys don't remember this. You're way too young.
No, you talked about it, though, on a previous episode.
I've talked about it. Yeah. A lot of folks of my generation, all folks of my generation, remember Mountaineer rap. It's funny to hear Tony Caridi tell a story about the day that it was taped and how Coach Nealon found out.
Coach Nealon was not
happy.
Pleased. Yes.
Not happy at all. Now, that's the pop culture contribution of the 88 team. The pop culture contribution of the 07 team, the runaway beer truck, right? Still infiltrating pop culture in West Virginia even today, right? He didn't go the way of the dinosaur like the Mountaineer rap. He's timeless, right? So here's the runaway beer truck. He's the pop culture contribution. He's what the 07 team left in the time capsule. All right. So you can dust him off and he still fits into society just like he did all those years ago. Now, here's the one but for each team. I want to spare you the but for the 07 team. I don't think I need to mention the but for the 07 team. It's the 800-pound gorilla. We all know what it is. So let's give the but for the 88 team. The 88 team, but they were 11-0. But they played 9 teams with a losing record.
It's crazy.
But that is crazy. I mean, they went through the stretch of 3-8, 3-8, 3-8. So, yeah, when you look back at the grid, it showed that Virginia Tech 3-8, East Carolina 3-8, Boston College 3-8, Cincinnati 3-8, bunch of 5 and 6 teams. They played the only Joe Paterno Penn State team in his tenure of 40 plus years of the losing record. So they played 2 ranked teams, 2 teams in the regular season of 11 games with a winning record. One of them was a really good Syracuse team that won 10 games, and they beat them in the regular season finale in Morgantown to achieve perfection in the regular season. And the other one was a win at Pitt. It was a tough game at halftime, but they separated 131-10, and that Pitt team kind of fell apart down the stretch and finished 6-5. So that West Virginia 88 team, its opponents only won less than 47% of their games. Owen, Europe, the 07 team, the opponents you guys faced won 54.5% of their games. So tougher schedule, 5 ranked teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, the thing I'll say about the 88 team, they did maybe one of the most difficult things in all of football, to win every single game you're supposed to. That is hard. Very few teams win every game you're supposed to. Oh, and that's one of the hardest things in sports. It really is. And to go out as many times as that team did, heavily favored against these under 500 teams, and week in, week out, take care of business, that's a tall ask, and they did it. So, okay, so thoughts on that, and then we'll get to the final results.
Go ahead, Big O.
There's no thoughts on
that. He lets you off the hook there a little bit. I will say, not too bad, although he mentioned that 800-pound gorilla a couple too many times. That is, I mean, it is nuts that in that same year, I mean, Penn State's down, Pitt's down, Virginia Tech, Cincinnati, Boston College. I mean, you kind of had a lot go your way there in 88, and then you take care of business at home against a good Syracuse team. It's interesting. It always, that's half the battle too. Like any team that's ever won a championship, the schedule falls your way favorably in some elements. That is certainly part of it. Jed, before we get to the results, a final thank you to our friends at Johnston Equipment for being a presenting sponsor of In the Gun. Make sure you're checking out their new location, Route 33, just outside of Weston.
Yeah, the final point of the 88 team, we talked about it. They took care of business even when favored. And at some point in each one of those games, they just had that killer instinct and they'd separate. Look at some of these games at halftime. Pitt was 10-7 at halftime. They won 31-10. They found themselves in the second half. Maryland, that was a 5-6 Maryland team. That was 24-21 at halftime. Final score 55-24. They turned it on in the second half. They dug down and made it happen. Against a 3-8 East Carolina team, it was 17-10 at halftime. Shut them out in the second half, won 30-10. Even Boston College. That Boston College team was bad. They were 3-8. That was a 24-12. It was still somewhat competitive at halftime. Final score 59-19. They didn't concern themselves. Oh no, here we are in a dogfight. It's halftime. They just went out and took care of business, understanding there was going to be a stretch in each game where they were just going to put the pedal down and separate, and they did. Now, when we put this final poll up, it was the most controversial among the commenters. And you could tell there was a divide, a bright line dividing old school, new school. And there was great debate, spirited debate on the Twitter poll, the X poll, between the commenters. Hey, if anybody saw that 88 team, this wouldn't even be a conversation. Nobody even know. Oh, yeah, well, the 07 team did X, Y, and Z. You guys didn't play anybody in 88. Well, the 07 team didn't do that. Okay, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And early on, I mean, this thing holds several hundred votes, the championship round it. And I'm looking at this thing after I posted it several hours into the evening. That first day, it was posted for like 3 days. I glance at it, and it's like, at one point, it was a couple hundred votes in. It was 50% to 50%. I'm like, are you kidding me? It is split dead even, hundreds of votes into this. And then I look, and 07, early the next morning, was up 51 to 49. Well, actually, it was like 50.8 to something, okay?
Yeah.
So it was that close. And I think it was like late in day 2 when Major broke a tackle. He made a guy miss. He turned the corner, and here he came. And wouldn't you know it, but the fans have declared as the all-time greatest team in West Virginia football history by the narrowest of margins, taking home 52% of the final fan vote. The 1988 Mountaineers over the 2007 Mountaineers. 52% to 48% was the final tally. What a battle it was, and it literally was back and forth. So,
much respect.
Yeah,
I tell you what,
said.
those are two good ones. I'm just the 05 team is always it for me. Okay, near and dear to my heart because just what they did against the SEC champion Georgia, they smoked Pitt. That game against Louisville, which is one of my favorite memories of my life. But I tell you what, 07, 88, can't go wrong with either one. But that's great. I love how it all played out with the two Neyland teams against the two Rich Rod teams, and then.
Yeah,
I think the two most popular teams in program history coming down to the final there. Pretty good. Listen, I tried, Big O. I voted for you guys. All right. I couldn't vote for the team that I never saw that was before I was born. All right. So you had my vote at least, Big O.
I appreciate it, brother. No, it's much respect to even get that in that championship game with, I've been lucky to meet a lot of those guys here. In the last couple of years and swap stories and get to know these guys a little bit. Great dudes. And I think the biggest compliment anyone can get when the 15 years on who was better is you could have played with us. You know what I mean?
It.
And you get to get those nods. That's a big honor.
No doubt.
It's a high compliment.
Big O, you could have played in any era. You could have played in any era, baby. And I know that those guys mean it. You know what we should have done? Now we should have got our guy Bo Orlando on here to get someone from the other side of the conversation. But yeah, Bo gets bragging rights here for now, I guess.
That's right.
We'll have to get
friend of the show.
We'll have to get Joswiak on, dude. We'll have to get old Brian Joswiak on here.
There we go. Yeah, well, maybe we'll have to reach out to some of those 80s guys and get them on a follow-up here.
Yep.
So obviously what we now need to do, I have it prepared. We're going to do an episode. I'm not going to subject the poor fans to vote on it. We're just going to count down the 10 worst teams in West Virginia football history. I have it ready. I have it ready.
no.
Yeah.
Don't make me do
Yeah. that.
All right. Don't make me do
Oh,
that.
no.
Yeah. That's coming soon because I have it prepared. Yeah.
If the 3-9 team from my senior year in 2013 is on that list, let's not discuss. All right. Let's not rehash.
I'll tell you what.
Let's not
It's not a fun
rehash.
exercise to be comparing 3-9 and 4-8 teams.
Yeah, I'm sure
Right?
it's not.
That's what I was left to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that will be for another time, but that will do it for this edition of ITG. There you go. We have our champion, 1988. Pop the champagne. The title is yours, baby. Big thanks to our guy, Skyler, for putting this together for us. As always, for the runaway beer truck, Owen Schmidt, the signal caller, Jed Drenning, I'm Wes Euler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care, everybody. Hope everyone has a happy July 4th, and we'll talk to you soon. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.